It is a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank Barbara Ainsworth for giving me this opportunity, and I also want to thank Kim Scott for helping me find my way to Pennsylvania. Thank you all for this honor. So I'm going to be sharing some data today from the Healthy Aging Study in Louisiana, and let me give you an outline so you can see where I'm headed. I want to spend the first few minutes of my talk this morning talking about successful aging to provide an academic context for us, and I want to introduce the Louisiana Healthy Aging Study. This is an interdisciplinary program project grant that I've been working on since 2002. I want to present some data today from our very first study looking at social engagement and health with a relatively smaller sample size of 364 individuals. And I'll highlight some findings from that, and then I'll go on to talk about a second finding that expands the first one with a larger data set, and highlight some of those findings and wrap up with conclusions and future directions. So to begin with, let's look at the Macarthur study of successful aging. And you may all be familiar with Rowe and Kahn, who described 3 components of successful aging. And according to Rowe and Kahn, the absence of disability and disease and the lack of factors predisposing one towards these, the maintenance of physical and cognitive function that promotes well-being, and connection with other people and involvement in productive pursuits are the 3 components of the Macarthur study of successful aging as articulated by Rowe and Kahn. This is a lovely approach. These factors are supposed to interact with each other. Very nice, compelling, but there's one limitation at least with this model. And that is, people have chronic conditions. People of all ages have chronic conditions, so the idea of being free or lacking disease and disabilities is not tenable. People continue to lead full and productive lives anyway, despite disability and disease. So the first criteria, I've got that in red, simply because it's time to stop thinking about that. It doesn't seem to be relevant anymore. Instead, I want to move forward thinking about the maintenance of physical and cognitive function that promotes well-being. And also the focus of my talk today is connection with other people and involvement in productive pursuits, the second and third criterion. Now, we all know successful aging when we see it, so academic considerations aside, I want to show you what successful aging looks like in Louisiana. So I've selected some photographs of our participants to share with you, to show our nonagenarians, that's people that are 90 and over, in action. So here's our first gentleman. This is Mr. Trent at 101 years old. He's participating in the Senior Olympics. And on this day in 2011, he was able to throw the discus 25 feet and 5 inches, which is really, really remarkable. And just as a side note, very sadly, he died 6 months after. So he would be in the presence of terminal drop, but still able to throw the discus 25 feet, which I find most compelling. So that's a 101-year-old in our study. Let me also show you Miss Julia, who's leading her birthday bikes parade for Mardi Gras at age 95. So she was being honored on that day for her achievements as a gold medalist in the National Senior Olympics biking competition, and she still rides her bike. You can see her around the LSU campus, even these days. Now, I've saved the best for last. I want to just show you Miss Marnie very briefly. She did literally jump in, dropped in for her 90th birthday party. She jumped out of an airplane, so 3 lazy circles in the sky, and then out pops Miss Marnie. She had a trainer with her, of course, but she parachuted safely to the ground and landed without a problem, which is just wonderful. Why do you do this on your 90th birthday? So you can show your friends that age is just a state of mind, even when you're nearing the century mark. So when you skydive at 90, what do you do at 95? You make the entrance to your birthday party on a 4-wheeler. So here's Miss Marty again. And I just want to show you, she's on her 4-wheeler on her farm. This is in East Feliciana, and here she is. You can see her a little bit better with roses. But anyway, you can see how erect she is riding on her 4-wheeler. You can also see her throwing a javelin here, and she's throwing a javelin in the 2007 Senior Olympics at the University of Louisville. This is at age 95, where she set a national age group record with a throw of almost 12 feet, and she won on that day her 110th medal. So these people are just absolutely marvelous, and it's been such a joy to study them since 2002. I just had to share my nonagenarians with you. Moving right along, I want to tell you about the context in which we study nonagenarians, and that's the Louisiana Healthy Aging Study. This is an interdisciplinary and multi-institutional collaboration that I'm doing with my friends from the Health Sciences Center in New Orleans and also Tulane University School of Medicine. I'm at LSU in Baton Rouge. We also have participants, co-investigators from the University of Alabama, University of Pittsburgh, and we do the testing at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center there in Baton Rouge. So this is the LHOS, just briefly. That's myself and Michael Jaswinski. Jaswinski's the geneticist on Project 1, looking at genetic factors in aging. I'm the cognitive psychologist who studies well-being and cognition, and the oldest old. We're sort of the bookends of the Louisiana Healthy Aging Study, if you will. Oops. But just to sort of illustrate where we are today, so I'm the cognitive aging psychologist. We've been doing a lot of work on cognitive function with the healthy aging study data over the past 10 years or so, which is shown here. And to borrow from the words of Tom, the stuff that older adults, cognition is mostly what I study, the stuff that runs low in the tank. But today, instead of that, we're going to talk about social factors in healthy aging. So leaving cognition aside, let me move on and tell you about the two studies that we've done to look at the interaction between social function and the retention of physical health in the oldest old. So the first study to tell you about, we were interested in looking at social engagement and health, and there were two objectives. I was interested in looking at age and gender effects in self-reported health and objective health status. And we also wanted to look at social engagement and positive health behaviors as predictors of self-reported health and objective health status. Now, let me mention, by social engagement, I'm talking broadly about the number of clubs and social organizations that these people belong to, and also satisfaction with social support. By positive health behaviors, I'm talking about alcohol use and tobacco use as our index of healthy positive health behaviors, looking at these as predictors of self-reported health and objective health status. So very briefly, let me give you an overview of the methodology. The participants that I'm going to talk about today all were drawn from the Louisiana Healthy Aging Study, which we have a total of 869 individuals. The first study is the smaller data set with 364 people where 3 age groups are compared, 21 to 59-year-olds, 60 to 89-year-olds, and the oldest old in the first study we're looking at are nonagenarians, 90 and over. The second study I'll present is drawn from the same Louisiana Healthy Aging Study. We have just had collected more data, have a larger data set, which enabled us to partition the sample into 4 comparison groups with young adults, middle-aged adults, older here to 84. Oldest old is the more classic 85 plus. I'm going to present some paper and pencil measures of social behaviors, self-reported health, specifically the SF36 PCS score, and objective health status was estimated based on the number of chronic conditions from 0 to 5. The procedure unfolded in 2 days. On the first day, we had executed informed consent, and a nurse obtained their medical history. We also collected blood and urine samples, and my group assessed socio-demographic characteristics and screening measures. The second visit, we brought them to the Pennington for a day-long testing, which has generated the 2,200 variables in the Louisiana Healthy Aging data set. Anyway, that was carried out at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge. And for those of you that haven't had the pleasure of visiting Louisiana, let me just show you briefly. This is the catchment area. So here's the 8-parish county area. Baton Rouge is right in the middle. So this is a 40-mile radius of Baton Rouge. So the older people in our study were certainly not affected by Katrina and Rita, which wiped out the coast. So we're far enough away from the coast that they're fine. Let me share the findings from the first study. As you might imagine, we observed significant age effects for all of the social engagement measures we assessed, and also for the chronic conditions as well. Age and gender effects were apparent for positive health behaviors and self-reported health. Now, of greater interest are the regression analyses, which let me show you next. The panel on the left shows regression analyses done on the SF36 self-reported measure of physical health. And as you can see, we entered demographic variables first to take care of the influence of them. What's more interesting are the social support and hours out variables, which are actually accounting for 15.4% of the variance in self-reported health after having accounted for socio-demographic factors, which I found really most remarkable, that social factors are accounting for variance in self-reported health. And then on the right panel, I show objective health status. This is the measure of chronic conditions. And again, after controlling for socioeconomic or socio-demographic differences here, we entered tobacco and alcohol, which is actually, those were not significant predictors at all, which I was a little bit surprised about. But very happy to see that the number of clubs and hours spent outside of the home are significantly accounting for actually 10.47% of the variance after having accounted for all of these other factors, which is very, very exciting to me to see that social factors are accounting for variance in physical, objective physical health. That's really cool. So to summarize, what do we know now? We know that age and gender are important. Well, we've always known that. What's of greater interest is that social participation, defined as clubs, and also activities, hours outside of the house, are also important and account for more variance than positive health behaviors. So next step, moving on, let me share some data from the follow-up study where we were interested in expanding our assessment to include physical activity variables. So we're also looking at social factors in health in the context of measuring physical activity. And we had two objectives in this study. Our first was to sharpen focus on social behaviors in health in midlife. So with a larger data set, we were able to have a group of middle-aged adults. So the middle-aged reference group is new in this study. We were also very interested in addressing the question of whether social factors still matter when you've taken physical activity into account. So the Yale Physical Activity Survey, particularly the total energy expenditure score, was included in our data analyses. So same social factors, but in addition, the measure of physical activity, which is new to this study. So again, let me present the self-reported health data on the left panel. And here we're looking at SF36 data plotted as a function of the 4 age groups here and also gender. And as you can see, we have an age group main effect and a clear gender effect. So the 2x2 analysis of variance show the age and gender effects. But the greater interest is what's going on with the age and gender interaction here, because the 2 younger reference groups don't differ at all, but we start to see a significant gender difference favoring males in the older adults, and that continues over in the 90+ group. It's a little bit larger, not significantly larger, but both of the older reference groups are showing this differential advantage of gender. So let's look at the objective health status data. These are chronic conditions, again, a cumulative index of chronic conditions. And here, actually, all we're seeing is an age main effect. So the analysis of variance here shows that the effect of age is significant. The gender differences that's implied is not significant. But the point I want you to note about these data is if you look, even our younger adults are showing chronic conditions. So that first criteria of absence of chronic conditions is just not at all in line with the physical reality of most people. Now, let's take a look at the regression analysis. And here we see hierarchical regression analysis on the self-reported health data. The first block, of course, is showing the demographic factors, which are accounting for 23.8% of the variance. Interestingly enough, and as you might suspect, the physical activity measure is a significant predictor. But of greater interest in that, to me, is that these social factors are still accounting for variance even after we've accounted for physical activity, which I find absolutely fascinating. So hours spent outside of the home and also social support are accounting for variance. And in this model altogether, we're accounting for 27.6% of the variance, which I find fascinating. Let's see what's happening next with chronic conditions. In our objective health status measure shown here, again, we enter the demographic variables first. Now, surprisingly, our physical activity measure was not a significant predictor at all when you look at objective health status, which I found a little surprising, but that's just a reality. Of greater importance is the number of clubs is still predicting objective health status after having controlled for these other variables. So altogether, we're accounting for 34.1% of the variance in objective health status, which I find very compelling. So to wrap it up, there are two take-home points that I want to leave with you, and the first one comes from our first study, and that is that social engagement contributes to self-reported health and objective health status, both as we demonstrated in study 1. And the important take-home point from study 2 is social factors still matter. So even after you've taken physical activity into account, social factors still matter for health in older adults. And in terms of where are we going from here, one of the things that we haven't yet addressed in this data set is the role of biological variables, which we have to look at. So we'll be looking at lifetime stress and addressing the question of whether or not that moderates the relationships we've observed among social activities and physical health. And finally, we want to take a closer look at genetic factors to determine whether genes play a role in the social factors, physical health relationship. So this is where we're headed. And in closing, I want to acknowledge our grants and funding. This work I presented today was supported by the Louisiana Board of Regents and also the National Institute on Aging, and I'm certainly grateful for that funding. And I'm also grateful for my LHOUS colleagues, Mike Jaswinski, David Welsh, Julie Valofla, Joseph Su, Tina Lafonte, Leanne Meyer, and there are many, many others associated with the study. And of course to my students who have done the lion's share of data collection on this project. So thank you for your attention and interest.